All right. I think we're live. I never know because I don't get the going live thing until after my guest. So is it saying we're live, Ron?
Says you're in the show. Everyone can see and hear us. So I
Okay.
guess that's. I guess
I think
I
that's
can
a
only. I can only believe it.
that's the definition of being live. So hey, this is Brent Leary. This is the first live stream of the week. It's Wednesday. Wow, that's I had a couple of days to just chill, but we're back.
He had
You
such a
know what
big
this
one on
is.
Friday with Colin from Salesforce and Paul that you just had to like let that sit for a little while. I guess.
Yeah, that, and I knew that you were coming up, so you give proper spacing for that. But hey, so this is what I like to call the BBC, and as I like to say, this is not based in the UK. This is the Stockbridge version of the BBC, which is the Brent Broadcasting Channel. But with me today, you've seen him before if you've watched any of these. Ron Miller, he's the enterprise tech reporter for TechCrunch. I've known him way before that. I see a little gray. I've got the
Yeah, it's
gray
starting to
too.
come in
So,
there. See?
so we've been around. We both of us been around the block, around the enterprise space, and it's always good to have Ryan come on and join me. So, thanks for joining me, man.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
I mean, you look comfortable.
I am in my comfy chair.
I'm gonna hit you with the hard question first. So, is Mac Jones going to be the starter, or are they going to go with Cam?
You know, I've been watching the reports from camp every day, as I'm sure you're doing with the Rams, and um, the kid is doing pretty well. I mean, he's not. It doesn't look like he's overmatched. When I watched the exhibition game on Thursday, uh, against the Washington football team, Cam only played 2 series and then he was out of there. But Cam looked like Cam from last year to me. He was indecisive. He
Uh-oh.
he he threw some bad balls, and I mean, he did move the team and then got screwed by a holding penalty. But um, he still looks like a guy who's past his prime. And then Matt came out there and he's making the throws he needs to make. As you'd expect a young quarterback to make. And seemed to be making good decisions back there. Didn't seem overmatched or overwhelmed. So my guess is that we start the year with Cam, unless the coaches just like decide, let's just throw the kid in the fire. But I think ideally a young quarterback who hasn't played a lot in college. He doesn't have a lot of game experience compared to some of the other guys that came out of this class. I think they'll probably be better off sitting, but I guess they'll make that decision. Oops, you're frozen.
Back. I see you. All right, I think we're back. A little. See, whenever I start talking about the Patriots, things happen. That's all
Well,
I.
see, I want you to know also that I did watch on Friday, and it didn't go unnoticed that you said the Patriots. And this is the way I look at it. I go, look, Paul's a Yankees fan. You're a Patriots hater. We all get along. We're all friends. So that just shows, like, listen, people out there, internet, you can have big differences and still be friends. So
That's true. That is so true. Unless you're a Jets fan like Alan Bergson is, then all bets are
well,
off.
then there's never saving him.
That's right. All right, man. So you actually took some time off,
I
but then
did.
you came back and you came back with a vengeance, man. I was just looking at all the stuff you've written since you've been back.
I can't keep up with
it. So when you take a break, a vacation, do you just completely shut off, don't even look at news, and then just come back ready to roll?
I wish I could say that, although I didn't write anything, but I couldn't escape the news, and like the big Zoom thing kind of hurt me a little bit that I couldn't cover that. But I'm just like, you're on vacation. My wife's like, don't pay attention. I'm like, but it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. I'm missing it.
Well, but you were back for this other kind of a big news story here that kind of shocked everybody last week.
Oh
This
yeah.
whole idea of Salesforce Plus, and you covered it a couple of times, and you got some feedback from folks like me. But before we jump into it and talk, we had a chance. Paul Greenberg and I had a chance to talk with Colin Fleming, who's the SVP of brand experiences for Salesforce, and he's the guy heading up the rollout for Salesforce Plus. And I wanted to play you this clip because it was kind of an interesting take that Colin had on, one of the things that kind of the thinking and rationale behind the Salesforce Plus rollout. Let me play you this little clip and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Clearly in the marketing industry, there's a pretty big effort happening around this cookieless future, right? So every company has to be thinking about building a first-party data model where some of the tips and tricks that us marketers have built over the last decade are very quickly going to be irrelevant. And that's going to force companies into a different world. And this is our strategy. We think that it is a first party data model for us where, if you look at Salesforce, if you go to Salesforce's website today, we're very good at capturing your information and getting you on the phone with a Salesforce representative. We're very highly proficient at that. However, we think that there's a higher level than that where we start to educate you in terms of how people are using Salesforce, what that looks like, how CMOs are tackling this new pandemic, how chief executive officers are doing that. And there's more of an educational, higher part of the funnel conversation that we want to be part of. And so it's as simple as you go to Salesforce Plus, all we need is essentially your email address, and you're off and you have full access to everything within the Salesforce ecosystem.
All right. Yeah. So a lot of people were kind of focusing on the headlines, like the Netflix, the Disney Plus, and that maybe caused a lot of people to like, what the heck is Salesforce doing? But after hearing that, I was like, oh, that's actually a really interesting piece of the puzzle that wasn't getting top line notice. But what were your first impressions of Salesforce Plus when you first heard about it?
I was like, what the heck are they doing? Honestly, that was my first response was, what? Why? The more I've dug into this, the more I kind of get it. But I think that there were two reactions. One was like my initial reaction, and there was somebody on, in my Twitter feed who said, I give this a year. And, to some extent, I don't disagree with that. This could be really good and really big, or it could be just, kind of like Salesforce Chatter. It wasn't very good and it wasn't very big. And they're probably watching this going, oh, come on, we still have Chatter. But, it just
got Slack too, which I know we're going to be talking about in a minute.
No, I mean, Slack is a bigger deal, a bigger manifestation of what they were trying to do with Chatter. And we can talk about that in a minute. But, that conversation that you and Paul had with Colin got me thinking about a few things. And, he talked about how they built this, professional studio that could be in Hollywood, and that they want to do this kind of series TV and, not entertainment per se, but stuff that's entertaining and educationally. He reluctantly used the word edutainment, I think, a couple of times, and winced each time he did. But but I mean, for lack of a better word, that you want something that's engaging, and you want something that's informative, and I think that's what they're hoping to do. As I wrote, this is in many ways probably the most ambitious content marketing project ever undertaken by any company. Almost every company out there, for the last decade, has been engaged in content marketing, usually involving blogging and podcasts and, ebooks and, any amount of content. And Colin has said that, I think there was an FAQ that they shared with the press team did. And, one of the things he said was, we could put out a white paper or we can put out a show. And what do people want to engage with more? And I think to an extent, he's right, that people would rather watch something engaging than read a white paper, which frankly aren't usually very interesting or, are just like not memorable. You may get something out of them, but, I think the idea is to make something memorable. And when you combine it with this idea that you just played in that clip, that we're going into this cookieless period, in the not too distant future, and it's going to change the way companies market, then, I think this is at least the first attempt by Salesforce to try and model what that future could look like. And it's for them because obviously they're a very successful company and they want to maintain their success. But I think and this is something that you alluded to quite a bit, and I think Paul did too in that second article that I did on TechCrunch, and that this could be something more. This could be a model and a system that gets put in place for Salesforce customers to take advantage of once Salesforce figures out how this works. So, I mean, whether this ends up being something that's unsuccessful or not, I think the idea of the effort and trying to figure out what's next is part of who they are. You know, they are trying to be the model SaaS company, and they are the largest pure SaaS, born SaaS vendor out there, and certainly very successful at it. So I suppose we should be giving them the benefit of the doubt and seeing where this goes.
Well,
But I'm
I
not
think
necessarily.
yeah,
But I do want to see where it goes.
I think it's depending on how they frame this, because if it's framed in a wide, broad frame, that makes it even more trickier. But if they frame it just in the kind of the enterprise view of, like you said, figuring out a first, party data play component, and this almost kind of fits into the whole discussion of direct to consumer. Like when the pandemic first hit, the obvious is, well, people couldn't go shopping the traditional way, so they had to shop more online for groceries. Although that channel was already there, it
Right.
became
A lot more people used it than had used it previously, for sure.
Absolutely. And so that meant some retailers had to figure out, well, people can't go to the store. How do we build a direct link now? We need to, because our main channel is gone, at least for the time being. So they all have been trying to figure out, well, how do we go direct? How do we build a direct relationship? And because of the pandemic, that went from maybe a nice to have to a necessity. And I think it maybe started with groceries, but all sorts of companies and vendors are saying, well, maybe there's a really great benefit to having this direct, relationship, that we're able to do that. So maybe this is a play on that, but I think, it may have been blurred because of, the top line. Oh, they want to be like, a streaming channel that goes up against Netflix. I don't really get that sense.
I mean, they're not going up. They're not. I don't. Yeah. I mean, we had Netflix in our headline, and I don't think that the idea was that they're going to be like Netflix, either in quantity or quality, or just kind of how they
categories present. Of content. Either.
I mean, this is going to be. I mean, if you look at the first 4 channels that they've created, these are very much business oriented focus. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but when I talked to Salesforce about their first Slack integrations, they said, well, this is the beginning, and then we're going to expand out to other areas. And I think that's the way Salesforce works, right? They start off and they kind of try something, they get something out there, and then if it starts to gain some traction, then they expand on that. And that's what I expect with this. The thing that's could be tricky about this is it could be an expensive endeavor to produce content like this that they're talking about, to make it interesting and informative. And that will be how long a leash this project will have is something to watch.
Yeah. Alan asked a question: is this the decentralization of Dreamforce-esque content? And I'll just say, Alan, yeah, because that's exactly what Alan said.
I think Colin made that clear on Friday, right? Yeah. That this was kind of building on what they did over the last 12 to 18 months, because the pandemic forced us all to do that, who put on events, was that we had to figure out a virtual presentation of these events. And well, there was a lot of growing pains, and I know certainly at TechCrunch there were. We also figured out, and a lot of companies figured out that put on events, that, hey, like we can get, however many people, I mean, with Salesforce, it's ridiculous numbers, like tens of thousands of people into a city. And, but we're still limited by people's travel budgets and their, ability, to spend money on these events. And if you can do it virtually and maybe, lower the price, and you lower the barrier to entry because you don't have any of the travel costs associated with attending, then you actually get a lot more. And I remember talking to the CEO of Red Hat about this very early on in the pandemic. And he's like, we were really surprised. Instead of getting one person from the department, we were getting the whole department. And I think Salesforce saw that as well. And Salesforce, as you know, doesn't just put on Dreamforce. They put on these city focused and kind of subject focused events all over the world. I've been to a few of them in Boston, and they still do their thing. They're still very. One of the ones I went to in Boston, they actually had Bill Belichick speaking, and they had the Dropkick Murphys performing. And the funny side story is the Dropkick Murphys said we've never performed at 10 o'clock in the morning before. This is the earliest we've ever gotten up, but they paid us so much money we couldn't refuse. But they're used to putting on these events. They're used to feeding out this content, and when they had to do it virtually, it was like all of their customers, like you were just alluding to, learning to sell online, learning to present online, opened up kind of this idea that, hey, we could do this, and maybe we should be looking at this as a broader kind of thing, even when we're back to in-person events.
Yeah, but my thing is, did Bill Belichick do more than just mumble a few lines at this stage?
He was actually pretty, he can be very articulate when he wants to be. It's only when he's talking to the press that he's like, oh.
Exactly. All right. So you mentioned Slack, and of course that deal closed recently.
Well, I was on vacation. Well,
yeah, but now they announced some new integrations now that the deal is closed, and you wrote about it.
I did. So when their PR team approached me about this, I was very curious, and then I was like, well, what is it going to be? And then they sent me a list. And I'm like, this is interesting. So I talked to the people at Salesforce about it, and there were a couple of things that really stood out for me. And one was the deal room. And so a deal room is a place, obviously if you have like, $1,000 sale, you don't need a deal room. But if you've got a very complex sale and you've got internal people and, lots of different departments and product people and, engineers who come on site and work with the customer and all of these kinds of things that are involved in a big deal. And then you probably have external partners and maybe, Accentures and companies like that, Deloitte's, who come in and help, drive the sale as well, and then would be involved in the implementation. It gets more and more complex, and I think Slack is really well suited for something like that, and was before. And but what Salesforce did was, they spent $28 billion. They're going to figure out some ways to use it, and this is the first thing that we're seeing. And I think from a sales perspective, having this place where you can get all the parties together, and it's an evolving thing in a big sale, bringing people in, they can see what's happened, they can see who's been involved, they can get the flow of the deal, and they're not reading like this email chain. I think it's a little bit more handleable and organized in this paradigm. And then when you combine that with Slack, what is it called? Slack Connect, that lets you connect to, external parties, which people freaked out about when that was announced last time. Like people thought, oh, you're going to get spammed with, and Slack was always kind of envisioning this ability, to bring in third-party partners and, kind of talk to, customers directly through Slack, without having, you could have that direct contact, hence the name. And having that piece in the deal room, I think really creates something interesting. And the other thing that caught my eye was they called a swarm, which I thought was funny. I'll tell you a quick story. In the 90s, I was a technical writer, and I got involved with this consulting project where we went and worked with this travel company in Boston, and they sent out catalogs. This is in the days of direct mail, right? And they sent out catalogs, and they were very specific about their marketing, though. So they would send out different catalogs to different groups, and it was pretty, advanced from that perspective at that point. But they had everything was paper, and so you'd have customer service people. We went in there and we observed, and we'd see a customer service person like get a call, and then all of the customer service people would get off the phone and then have this like little powwow in the middle of the floor where people, and nobody's on the phone now, where people are saying, you know about this deal, because I haven't heard about this, and then somebody would say, oh yeah, I know about it, and and they would get their act together and they go back on the phone and say, well, this is what's happening, sir, and it was crazy. So, I mean, we created this for the time, this system that was involved PDFs and being able to search. So you at least had some online component. But this is like the modern manifestation of what we were trying to do back then. And having this virtual room where people can gather and get information from one another without getting off the phone, without getting off, the whatever it is, the call or the iMessage or the WhatsApp conversation, wherever you are, to be able to do that and kind of tap your colleagues on the shoulder and get that collective wisdom. I think that's brilliant. And the other thing that they added to that to make it even better was this kind of, yellow pages kind of thing where you could find an expert quickly and bring them into the swarm so that, if nobody there knew what they were talking about, but you knew that there was a SME out there who could help you, you could invite them. So I think those two things in particular were really good use of combining what Salesforce does with what Slack does. And as I said before, Rob Seaman, who I spoke to, who's the VP of Slack at Salesforce now, he said that, this is just the start. They're going to make more announcements at Dreamforce, and then in the coming months, I think they're all just kind of brainstorming over there, like, how can we use Slack? And they say that, and I think that's the beauty of this acquisition, is they can make Slack an integrated part of Salesforce, but Slack still gets to be Slack and do all the things it was doing before. It's and taking advantage of this thing that made Slack really as popular as it is, and it's that ability to integrate, enterprise applications and processes right inside it, and that's what they're doing.
And I think timing, it should work out really well with the whole work from home, and there doesn't appear to be anything any near in sight. A lot of these companies are saying even after things get back to whatever the normal is, they're going to let their folks work from home. And so you got employees working from home, you got customers, you got partners. It seems like this combination, what Microsoft has with Teams, there's a race to the top of this market, and it sounds like it's only good stuff basically for collaboration, particularly collaboration when you're geographically challenged and everybody is in all these different places.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Slack and the Slack video stuff that they're doing, and then you look at the Salesforce Plus stuff, and you see them thinking about how do you create this visual communication with customers, and it seems to be thematic, and I'm guessing it'll be a big part of Dreamforce.
Yeah, and you got to figure, because because of the pandemic, a lot of people working from home, they're getting better broadband options, wireless, broadband options, because this is like the future. You're going to have great bandwidth in order to work from home, to have video conferencing and video virtual events and be a part of these things without leaving your house. And so, yeah, I think, the infrastructure is really just starting to get built, all over the place for people to be able to take advantage of this, because, it's at this point where it's needed. There's almost no way to get around it, because, nobody wants to go through what we went through again and be kind of caught flat-footed.
Well, I mean, a lot of people had said, if this happened 15 years ago, what would we have done? We didn't have the infrastructure. And I think,
Right.
one of the things I was thinking about before I came on today was, how Slack succeeded where all those Web 2.0 companies didn't. And I know you've been around long enough to remember that whole collection
I
of
remember.
companies. And, one of the reasons they didn't is the bandwidth issue. One of the reasons they didn't is, it was pre-mobile to a large extent. And, when Slack came along, they kind of took what had been built previously and they said, well, now we have better bandwidth. And, they created a lot of, they took in a lot of what had been learned from that. But, that whole ability to integrate all this stuff inside Slack,
Mm.
I think was a super differentiator. And I think that's something that's going to be, when you combine that with, what they do with MuleSoft, and, they have so much going on now. They're going to have a lot of different angles that they can attack the market from. And it gives them a lot of options. And, one of the things that, that Lori McCabe said in that article was that it reminded her of LinkedIn Live, and it brought back to my mind that Salesforce had been really wanting to buy
They tried
LinkedIn
it,
at the time, and they got they got all muscled out moneyed by
26 billion, right?
Yeah. Now you see that they paid a little bit more for Slack, but at the time I don't think they had the ability to put out that kind of cash. But that was 2015, 16, and this is kind of their makeup there with that, and it's further down the road and it's more mature, and I think it will it could pay dividends for them.
Well, another thing you mentioned, that was the closing of their biggest acquisition, but that really didn't stop them because let's see, they went and bought a company pretty much right after they announced the closing of the Slack deal. They go in with the RPA, and I'm not trying to make this the Salesforce show here, but
it kind of is though.
But talk a little bit about how important this is.
Well, I don't think it is. I think it's important because I've been waiting for Salesforce to buy an RPA company for a long time now. I always thought this was kind of a natural thing for them, especially with MuleSoft. Service Trace is not a major player by any means, but when you team it with MuleSoft, it gives them some some entree into that space. I always thought that when they did this to do something bold, and get, UiPath or, one of those guys, one of the big players, Blue Prism, but I think we were talking about it when you said, they just spent all this money. They probably wanted to take small steps at this point for at least this year. And I think that's true. And, I was talking to Paul about it, Paul Greenberg, and Paul's feeling was that, RPA is kind of a limited technology. And I don't disagree with him at all. Where this market's probably going to be going is, expanding out from that. The thing that's great about RPA is, it works great with legacy technologies and allows you to do some level of automation when, you have a lot of legacy technology that you don't want to just rip and replace and start dealing with cloud and, machine learning and all of that. And that takes a whole another level of, expertise inside your company and frankly cost. And so what we're seeing, a lot of companies get into this, ServiceNow, IBM.
Pega bought one like 6 years ago. I forget the name of that company they bought.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember either.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of curiosity in this market. There's a lot of investment from venture capital in this market. But I just saw, an email from, I think it was it Gartner or Forrester this morning, that, it's still only less than $3 billion market, which in enterprise software is a drop in the bucket. So, I think that's probably why Salesforce said, well, we're going to dabble in it. It's a good fit for MuleSoft, and let's see where it goes.
Yeah, there's already, a lot of talk about intelligent automation and as a kind of the next step up from RPA, and there's a lot of focus on that now. But yeah, they had, like you said, dip their toe in the water and bring a component of that on. Can't fault them for that. All right, we're gonna actually going to talk about something other than Salesforce, man.
All right.
Because you also wrote, well, this is a company kind of in your neck of the woods, and we both, been following these guys for a while.
Oh yeah, a long
HubSpot,
time.
yeah, like they've been around since 2006, and I literally known these guys since it was just Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah, and they've been there, and Brian, kind of the CEO, and Dharmesh, like the technology guy behind the scenes. But they made a big announcement during their last quarter call where Brian is actually kind of being moved up in a different position to executive chairman, and Yamini Rangana, I don't know her, and I hope I'm not butchering her name, is going to move up from chief people officer to CEO. What caught your attention about this?
Well, kind of seeing how things intersect and connect. If you think about it, HubSpot was the company that kind of brought content marketing to the masses. Brian and David Meerman Scott, who wrote the book called The New Rules of Marketing and PR back in 2007 or 8, was the guy who kind of brought this idea of, hiring journalists and producing content that was not marketing copy. And, he and Brian are good friends, and they have their Grateful Dead obsession in common, but they also have content marketing in common. And HubSpot is no longer just a content marketing company, but they are a company who still has a content management system that's designed for content marketing and is used by many firms out there for their content marketing efforts. So I think it's worth pointing out that connection. Yeah, Brian, I guess, got into a snowmobile accident last year or last winter, and he was offline for a while. Um, she took over and was doing everything. The dealing with the investors and dealing with all the day-to-day operations. And I mean, I don't know, I didn't talk to Brian, but my feeling is that after 15 years, he kind of just decided, well, this is, I wasn't planning on it, but this is a good time to kind of step back and, do a Jeff Bezos kind of move and take the on a much smaller scale. And
say, is Brian going to space or something? I didn't know about it.
Well, he does listen to the Grateful Dead, but
different kind of space, by the
way. Just stepping back from those day-to-day operations, because being CEO, taking it from startup to public, and he's been through it all, and he just may want to have a little bit more time in his life to balance things, and I can't blame him. Now, I've spoken to her before as part of an announcement, and very, very personable and competent, and I think it seems like there's going to be fine continuity there, and having that time to kind of settle in before the spotlight was on her, I think was probably, useful and helpful. And now she can just hit the ground running.
Yeah, she's, like you said, she's kind of been in this position as an interim for a while. And one of the more interesting, moves the last couple of months was HubSpot creating their own, they call it the HubSpot podcast.
Oh yeah, that's network. Right.
So, kind of, you look at what we just talked about with Salesforce Plus, and that's video content. Podcasting is on a tear. Spotify bought a podcast network. They paid Joe Rogan like $100 million to be, to do podcasting under their umbrella. It's huge. And so just as you look at maybe on a broader, scale with Salesforce Plus, this HubSpot podcast network kind of plays along the same theme, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's the same idea of trying to generate this quality content that, hopefully quality, that, that attracts people into your sphere, and then, gets you to stay based on, like these people seem to know what they're talking about. Let's see what they're up to. And I mean, that's the value prop of content marketing, whatever the content is, whether it's a podcast, a blog post, or a video series. The idea is to show your expertise and not do it by knocking people over the head with your products and services, but by talking about problems and things that may be you can solve and maybe your competitors can solve, but you're not like driving home the brand so much as your expertise, and then trying to draw in the customers into your sphere because you seem to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it feels like, Adobe, I remember years ago when they bought CMO.com, and that was great for 5 or 10 years ago. It was totally text based. It wasn't talking about their products. It was very much speaking to the kind of the what the CMO would be interested in and what they would need to make decisions. So it was very light touch on the products. It was very heavy touch on the themes that were important to that particular role. And you can just see like the kind of the evolution of that approach is being seen today with HubSpot Podcast Network, with what Salesforce is doing, Salesforce Plus. Like I said, it's kind of an evolution. We'll see how quickly, or how successfully some of these, ventures are. But the kind of the theme is pretty much the same. We need to deliver great content, compelling content, and attractive content to the folks that we want to communicate with. And we got to figure out a way to do that consistently and keep them over the journey of their kind of their business life.
Right. And I mean, yeah, I saw somebody said the other day, I don't know if it was an email subject or on Twitter, but somebody was talking about how the customer data platform was going to have even more importance, as we get into this cookieless world. And part of it is getting that, first party customer data into the system and then starting that customer journey. And, I think these are lures. These are, bait, if you will, to get people into the system, because, you have to find ways to attract people to you, because you're not going to be able to find them the way you could before this.
Absolutely. All right. One last thing I want to talk to you about, and this one was really to me is really interesting and fascinating. Twilio, I think it was back in September of last year, and maybe the George Floyd situation kind of led into this, but it seemed like Jeff Lawson had been thinking about this even before then. But they are trying to go beyond the traditional talk of inclusion and diversity from a numbers perspective. And I love this term. They want to become an anti-racist company. You had a chance to talk to the new chief diversity officer, Libra Clemens, and Jeff Lawson. What did you get from that conversation, and what are they trying to accomplish by becoming an anti-racist company?
So, I mean, that's Abraham Kendi's term from his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I think the company, I mean, as you said, this is something Jeff Lawson, the CEO, has been thinking about for a long time. And it goes back, one of his investors was was Kapoor Capital, and Freda Kapoor Klein and Mitch Kapoor have been, big spokespeople for diversity and inclusion and equity going back, decades. And they kind of drew him into this idea that he needs to be thinking about this. And this was 10 years ago, but it's an evolving thing. And, as you say, the George Floyd's murder was a precipitating event. And we heard a lot of companies talking about how they were going to be pay more attention to these kinds of things. I spoke to the woman who runs this company called Blendor, which kind of looks at public statistics and tries to ascertain, are companies doing what they say they're doing? And what she found was that a lot of them were not doing what they were saying things publicly and then actually getting worse in terms of their numbers. So when I talked to Twilio and I looked at the report that they had put out, it sort of stood out for me, because this wasn't just, first of all, it clearly wasn't lip service. Second of all, it was like when you talk to a lot of companies, they say, "Oh, we're trying to, get our numbers up or whatever." And I think, just pushing aside for a second, Bloomberg did a really good story a couple weeks ago on Asian Americans in Silicon Valley, and Asian Americans really have numbers. When you look at numbers, it's 25% of employees at tech companies in Silicon Valley are, identify as Asian American or Asian, and you think, okay, that's a significant percentage, but they still run into the same kinds of problems, even though they have, the numbers game has been solved, but it's more than that. And that's one of the things that kind of caught me about what Jeff and Lieber were saying, and it's because it's more than just saying we're going to hire X number of people. It's like, once we get people inside the company, how do we make them feel comfortable? How do we set up a system for them to succeed? And how do we, make sure they want to stay at our company? And, this involves all kinds of things. And one of the things that they talked about was this program where they take people from non-traditional backgrounds who are in the middle of their careers, and they put them in a coding boot camp, and then they get mentored. And there's like a VP of engineering involvement here, where they're mentored and taught to not only program, but what it's like to program in the cadence of a company like Twilio, because you have to be able to keep up. You have to be able to, and then when they get put on a team, that kind of mentoring continues until the individuals feel comfortable and are finding a way to succeed. And from what Jeff told me, because this is going back to last year's numbers, they've been doing this since 2017 or 18, and 93% of the people who came through that program are still there. So that's saying that they're doing well at this. And this is an attempt to not just say we're going to hire a bunch of people. This is we're going to try and do all those big things that that Kendi talks about in the book to become more than like, we're not going to be not racist, we're going to be anti-racist. Right, exactly. And the thing is, this is more than one company, this is more than one industry, this is at individual levels and business levels and societal levels, and hundreds of years of systemic racism that is built in and hard to just pull out. But I think what they deserve kudos for is that they're recognizing how difficult the problem is. They're not shying away from it, and they're trying a bunch of different things, not just saying like, oh, we're going to look at the top of the funnel and do this stuff and that. Where they're trying different things to attract different types of individuals, historically underrepresented individuals, into the company, and then not just doing the diversity, because as I said, that Bloomberg article drove home, you can have the numbers and not feel included, and not feel like you're getting the raises or that you're getting the promotions. So it's a whole big effort, and they're the first to admit that this is a journey, and they're not trying to pat themselves on the back. That wasn't what I got at all. But they wanted to start to put some of their lessons learned out there, so that other companies, if they're truly interested in becoming more diverse and equitable and inclusive companies, that here's some things that Twilio is learning, and they Jeff and Libra fully acknowledge that this is an ongoing and evolving journey. But it's something that I think that as a company, it's an unusual kind of approach, and that's why I thought it was so interesting to talk to them and to write them about them and what they were doing.
No, I thought it was really fascinating, and Salesforce has been doing a lot in this area over the last several years. So other Microsoft, some other companies are starting to go beyond the numbers, like you said. Although the numbers are still important, because there's still a long ways to go for certain underrepresented folks.
Oh,
So I
absolutely.
really applaud. I absolutely applaud the thinking that Jeff Lawson brought to this even before it happened. Because if it wasn't for him thinking like that and pulling the trigger, they wouldn't be where they are today with this. And the possibilities of what they do because of that is still ahead of them.
Yeah, and I mean, when speaking to Jeff and speaking to Libra, they're incredibly thoughtful about this. Like this is something that they're clearly, um, thinking about and wanting to improve and trying to think about. I hate to use the term outside the box, but they're not looking at the kinds of normal things which clearly haven't worked all that well, and getting beyond platitudes and trying different actions to try and make the changes that they can make as a company. And as you mentioned Salesforce, and I mean we're talking about Salesforce a lot, but they also had a report from their equity and what do they call it, justice task force that came out the other day, um, and they've made some really great progress in the last year too. And
Yeah.
I'm in the process of talking to them, and I'm hoping to write an article about what they're doing there as well.
Well, I hope you get a chance to talk to Craig Cuffey. I've had an opportunity to talk with him on a number of occasions. He's their chief procurement officer, and I talked to him directly, like a couple of months after the George Floyd situation last year, and then we did a follow up this year because like with Twilio, Salesforce was triggered to action because of the George Floyd situation. And they put a number of things in place, including a goal of, I believe, doing at least $100 million worth of business with Black suppliers within a couple of years. And they also are setting aside $100 million to invest in Black startups. So it's good to see, the initial thoughts and prayers and concerns, but it does feel like, Amazon is another one. They just announced a $150 million Black Business Accelerator. So it does feel a little different, but I definitely, unlike you, time is the big teller of just how big a movement this could be. But I really appreciate what I saw in your article from what they told you.
Yeah, and I think it's worth shining a spotlight on these kinds of efforts, and hoping that people see that and then say, because it's such a big problem, it's easy to kind of just say like, what can I do, you know um, but if you just make an honest effort, which is what I think Twilio is doing as an organization, and clearly Libra and Jeff are doing as individuals, and people within the executive committee or the executive team, um, you can see you can accomplish big things if you put your mind to it. And I think it's going to take lots of things like that built on top of each other to make big changes. But you can't make big changes until you start with something. And I think that this is the beginning of that.
Well, it may be the beginning of that, but it's the end of our conversation with Ron. It has been great. Yeah, I mean, we could sit here talking, even more, but you could have written about 5 articles in between now and when we talk. So I know you need to get back to it, but definitely appreciate it. And as you'll be back. I'm not even going to ask you the question because you're going to come back.
I will.
There's so many.
Whenever you want to chat, whenever we have like a week's worth of news like we had last week, I'm happy to come on.
Oh, that's awesome. So thanks again to Ron Miller. And of course, you want to read anything. Well, you actually write beyond, TechCrunch, but most of your stuff is at TechCrunch, right?
No, it's all at TechCrunch now.
Oh, okay. Okay, yep. Cool. I was like, in his spare time, he writes.
That's it now.
All right. Well, thanks again. And I'll be back tomorrow with CRM Players. And it's a special kind of, I don't know, mashup edition of the Players, because the guest tomorrow is actually going to be my Watching Amazon co-host. I have to say this. I can't just say his name, John Lawson. I have to say the cold one, the bold one, John Cold Rice Lawson. It's like some kind of legal thing I have to do now. But he's going to be joining us. So that'll be fun. So we will see you tomorrow. Thanks again and take care.